Welcome to Clarity Library, where ideas meet reflection, and reflection becomes transformation. Here, we break down powerful books into clear, practical lessons you can apply to your daily life. If you're passionate about growing your mind and becoming a better version of yourself, you're in the right place. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. We review a new book every day. Let's begin. There is a pattern silently shaping the world, influencing wealth, success, relationships, business, creativity, and even personal fulfillment. Yet most people live their entire lives without ever noticing it. It is the pattern that explains why some people seem to progress effortlessly while others struggle endlessly. Why small teams can outperform massive corporations. Why a few habits shape the majority of someone's life outcomes. And why a small percentage of actions are responsible for almost all the results that truly matter. This pattern is known as the 80-20 principle, the idea that 80% of results come from just 20% of efforts. Richard Koch argues that this principle is not merely a statistical curiosity, but a lens through which life becomes clearer, simpler, and more powerful once understood. The world is not linear, it is profoundly uneven. And because it is uneven, most of what we do each day contributes almost nothing to the results we desire. The tragedy is not that people aren't capable. It is that they are distracted by the wrong things. The principle first emerged when economist Vilfredo Pareto observed that 20% of landowners in Italy owned 80% of the land. But over time, researchers saw the same imbalance everywhere. In business sales, in scientific discoveries, in sports achievements, in crime statistics, even in how people use their time. Only a small portion of what we do carries the power to move life forward. Everything else is noise disguised as effort. This explains an uncomfortable truth. Most hard work is wasted work. Society teaches us that the harder we try, the more we deserve. People glorify fatigue, stress, and busyness. Bragging about exhaustion has become a strange symbol of worth. Yet exhaustion does not equal progress. A person can run for hours in the wrong direction and feel proud of the sweat, while ending up farther from where they intended to go. When the 80-20 principle enters awareness, it becomes obvious that the real key to progress is not exertion, but selection. The most successful individuals are not the ones who do the most, but the ones who choose what not to do. Life becomes powerful when energy is no longer scattered across everything, but concentrated on the few things that have the greatest impact. This is where clarity begins. When Steve Jobs returned to Apple in 1997, the company was suffocating under its own complexity. Hundreds of competing products, bloated teams, confused direction. Jobs studied the internal performance data and discovered that a tiny handful of products accounted for almost all of the company's influence and revenue. So he cut nearly 97% of them. Entire departments were shut down. Projects that had consumed years of effort were killed instantly. Many thought it was reckless. But by eliminating the unnecessary 80%, the essential 20% had room to expand. That decision became the foundation for Apple's rise into one of the most valuable companies in human history. Jobs did not make Apple work harder. He made Apple stop working on things that didn't matter. This same imbalance exists in everyday life. The average person spends their days responding to notifications, reacting to problems, jumping from task to task, and confusing movement with meaning. They become busy instead of effective. But when someone examines their day honestly, they often find that only a few actions actually create value. The deep work that moves a career, the conversations that strengthen relationships, the habits that multiply health or income. And yet those are the very things people neglect, because the trivial feels urgent while the meaningful requires choice. The principle reveals that your life is shaped far more by what you focus on than by how much effort you exert. If someone applies their energy blindly, the result is exhaustion. But when they direct their energy intentionally to the few activities with the highest return, the result is disproportionate growth. Effort is not what separates stagnation from progress. Clarity is. This realization naturally leads to the next transformation, noticing that not all decisions are equal. Some decisions permanently shift the trajectory of life. A single financial choice can reshape long-term income. A single connection can open doors that talent alone never could. A single personal habit, waking early, reading daily, exercising consistently, can compound into identity itself. Meanwhile, the majority of decisions have almost no lasting effect at all. Someone who understands this begins to live differently. Instead of trying to improve everything, they look for the leverage points, the places where a small input produces an extraordinary output. They realize that most people treat life like a battlefield where victory comes through effort, struggle, and endurance. But life is more like a chessboard. Position matters more than power. A well-placed move can outweigh 100 frantic ones. Yet this ability to focus only works if one also learns how to let go. Letting go of commitments that do not contribute to growth. Letting go of relationships that drain energy but offer no reciprocal meaning. Letting go of habits that feel comfortable but add no value. Letting go of the desire to be everywhere, liked by everyone, involved in everything. Letting go is difficult because letting go forces identity to shift. People cling to the unnecessary because the unnecessary is familiar. But clarity always requires sacrifice. In American work culture, for example, productivity is measured by busyness. Long hours are praised more than meaningful output. Yet research repeatedly shows that most employees accomplish their most impactful work in short bursts, often less than 2 hours a day, when they are uninterrupted and deeply focused. The rest of the day dissolves into email chains, meetings, noise, and shallow effort. The system rewards presence, not progress. But the people who rise above the system are the ones who quietly restructure their time, concentrating their best energy into the narrow window where real work happens, and refusing to waste their mental prime on the trivial. They work less, but achieve more. This naturally leads into the deeper truth behind the principle. The goal is not efficiency. The goal is freedom. When energy is no longer wasted, time becomes spacious. When time becomes spacious, thinking becomes clear. When thinking becomes clear, life becomes intentional. And when life becomes intentional, success begins to feel effortless, not because it lacks work, but because the work finally matters. The 80-20 principle begins to reshape not just how we see work, but how we see the architecture of success itself. Once you notice the imbalance, you begin to see it everywhere. In economies, in companies, in relationships, in creativity, even in happiness. You start realizing that a few experiences bring the majority of joy, a few people bring the majority of meaning, and a few choices determine the majority of outcomes in your life. This awareness is both liberating and unsettling. It liberates because it promises freedom from the illusion that everything matters equally. But it unsettles because it forces us to confront how much time, energy, and life we've poured into what never really mattered. Richard Koch argued that the essence of the 80-20 life is not doing more, but doing less of everything except the few things that multiply results. It's not an invitation to laziness. It's an invitation to strategy. In fact, the principle demands intelligence, self-discipline, and courage. The intelligence to recognize the vital few, the self-discipline to focus on them, and the courage to ignore everything else. In the world of business, this principle operates like an invisible law. Take Microsoft in its early years. A small fraction of its software products produced the majority of its revenue. Or Amazon, where a tiny percentage of best-selling items account for most of the company's profit. In music, a handful of artists generate the majority of global streaming revenue. In film, a few blockbuster franchises drive the industry's entire profitability. This pattern is not coincidence. It is the natural rhythm of value creation. But the power of the principle is not just in observing it. It's in using it deliberately. When applied consciously, it becomes a compass that simplifies every aspect of decision-making. For example, consider personal finance. Most people scatter their efforts trying to save pennies across countless areas, cutting lattes, trimming small expenses, while ignoring the few financial decisions that truly determine their wealth. Increasing income streams, investing intelligently, and avoiding debt traps. The wealthy do not simply save better, they focus better. They identify the 20% of actions that produce 80% of financial security, and then repeat them relentlessly. In careers, the same pattern applies. Only a few projects, relationships, or moments in a professional life create lasting advancement. One bold initiative can lead to recognition that years of routine effort never could. One mentor can accelerate growth faster than a decade of trial and error. One risk, taken with conviction, can rewrite the trajectory of an entire career. The challenge is that most people never stop to identify what those few high-impact levers actually are. Consider Warren Buffett's famously simple rule. He invests only in what he deeply understands. He once said, "The difference between successful people and really successful people is that really successful people say no to almost everything." Buffett's wealth, built from just a handful of major investments, is living proof of the 80-20 principle in motion. He filtered out the noise, focused on a few ideas he believed in, and ignored the endless temptations of the market. The secret wasn't effort, it was exclusion. The same pattern unfolds in creative work. In writing, filmmaking, or design, a small portion of output usually accounts for the majority of impact. J.K. Rowling wrote multiple drafts before Harry Potter took shape, but it was that one story, the one she nearly abandoned, that changed her life and literature itself. Artists and entrepreneurs often fail not because they lack talent, but because they dilute their talent across too many directions. The human mind thrives when focused. It suffers when scattered. The irony is that society constantly rewards the scattered. It praises multitasking, busyness, constant motion, the appearance of productivity over the essence of progress. The 80-20 principle demands a rebellion against that illusion. It teaches that true productivity begins with subtraction, not addition. It's not how much you do, but how much unnecessary effort you can eliminate. Richard Koch illustrated this with a simple truth. Most results in business and life are nonlinear. You can work twice as hard and not achieve twice the outcome, but sometimes by shifting focus slightly, you can achieve 10 times more with half the effort. This is the law of leverage, the quiet power of asymmetry. It's the same principle that explains why a single well-timed tweet can change a career while months of online noise produce nothing, or why one deep connection can transform a network while hundreds of shallow ones remain useless. In the global startup world, companies that understand this principle dominate. Take the story of Airbnb. When its founders struggled to grow, they didn't try to scale by working harder or advertising everywhere. Instead, they focused obsessively on a handful of users in New York, listening to their feedback, improving their photos, refining their experience. That focus on the vital few created insights that later scaled globally. The world saw an overnight success, but it was actually the result of narrowing focus rather than expanding it. This applies equally to personal relationships. In life, not all connections are equal. A handful of genuine relationships will bring far more meaning, support, and growth than hundreds of acquaintances. Yet modern social culture tempts people to spread themselves thin, measuring worth in followers instead of depth. The 80-20 principle invites a radical alternative: to invest disproportionately in the few people who multiply your energy, challenge your growth, and bring joy, while gently releasing those who do not. Every person has what Koch calls high-return relationships. They are the friends, mentors, partners, or collaborators who make you think bigger, act braver, and become better. If you look back at your own story, you'll likely find that the most transformative moments came through a very small number of people. When you identify and nurture these connections, your entire life compounds in value. But to do that, one must create space. And that brings us to the deeper psychological side of the principle: simplification. The 80-20 mindset demands not just choosing what to pursue, but what to remove. A cluttered environment leads to a cluttered mind, and a cluttered mind cannot see leverage. Simplicity, therefore, is not minimalism for its own sake. its clarity as a strategy. The more you simplify, the more power your remaining efforts gain. This is why some of the world's most successful leaders are almost obsessively minimalist, not only in possessions, but in decision-making. Barack Obama famously wore only gray or blue suits during his presidency, explaining that he didn't want to waste mental energy on trivial choices. Mark Zuckerberg does the same with his plain t-shirts. To outsiders, these habits seem quirky. But in truth, they reflect the 80-20th's understanding that willpower and focus are finite resources. Every small simplification protects energy for what truly matters. In personal life, the same truth applies. Most people overcomplicate their goals. They chase 10 ambitions and achieve none. But when they identify the few pursuits that hold genuine meaning, everything becomes lighter. A person might discover that writing one great book matters more than juggling 10 half-hearted projects, or that mastering one craft creates more fulfillment than dabbling endlessly. The moment focus sharpens, progress accelerates. The power of this principle extends even deeper, into happiness itself. Research consistently shows that most of a person's happiness comes from a small number of sources. A few key relationships, meaningful work, and personal health account for nearly all long-term satisfaction. Yet people often chase dozens of distractions, new gadgets, status symbols, or fleeting pleasures, while neglecting these core pillars. Happiness, like success, follows the 80-20 rule. Most joy comes from a few essential sources that deserve far more attention than we give them. This realization transforms how people spend time. Time is the ultimate finite resource, yet it's the one we treat most carelessly. The 80-20 mindset reframes time not as something to fill, but as something to direct. Instead of measuring a day by hours worked, it asks, which hours created value? Which actions truly mattered? When people start answering those questions honestly, they often discover that 80% of their time produces almost nothing, and that most of what they achieve happens in the small, focused 20% when they are truly present, aligned, and intentional. That awareness leads to the art of design, designing a life around what truly matters. Richard Koch emphasizes that once you understand this imbalance, you can consciously engineer it to your advantage. You can build systems, routines, and environments that favor the vital few and suppress the trivial many. This is where personal transformation begins. For example, an entrepreneur might realize that only a few types of clients generate both profit and joy, and then restructure the business around them, letting go of the rest. A parent might realize that a few moments of genuine attention with their child mean more than hours of distracted presence. A creator might realize that their audience only deeply connects with a small portion of their content, and then focus entirely on that, multiplying impact. Every version of this realization brings one closer to what Koch calls effortless effectiveness. The beauty of the principle lies in its universality. It applies to global economies as much as it does to morning routines. It governs the rise of corporations and the shape of personal destinies. The pattern is timeless because it mirrors how nature itself operates. In ecosystems, a small number of species dominate most of the biomass. In language, a small number of words make up most communication. In cities, a small number of streets carry most of the traffic. The universe itself seems to prefer imbalance, a quiet efficiency woven into the fabric of existence. Understanding this reshapes how we think about fairness. Life was never designed to be equal in distribution, not of effort, not of reward. But that imbalance is not injustice, it is opportunity. It means that every person, no matter their background, has the power to find their vital few, the specific activities, relationships, and habits that yield extraordinary returns, and design a life around them. In that sense, the 80-20 principle is not just a rule of efficiency. It is a philosophy of freedom. As the 80-20 principle becomes more deeply understood, it begins to touch something even more personal: identity. We start to realize that who we become is not shaped by everything we do, but by a small number of repeating choices that quietly define our character. Identity is not built in grand gestures or dramatic transformations. It is shaped in moments that seem ordinary but repeat consistently. How you spend the first hour of your morning, how you speak to yourself when no one is watching, how you respond to setbacks, how you choose to use your attention. Attention, more than time, becomes the real currency of life. Time is constant, but attention is selective. Two people can live the same number of days and end with entirely different experiences, not because one had more hours, but because one gave their attention to what mattered. When a person begins directing attention toward the meaningful 20% and withdrawing it from the distracting 80%, life starts to rearrange itself almost automatically. This is where the principle moves from being a strategy to being a way of being. It becomes less about doing and more about seeing. You begin to notice which conversations energize you and which quietly drain your spirit, which environments help you think clearly and which confuse your direction, which habits nourish your growth and which hold you still. And slowly, you stop fighting for balance and instead cultivate alignment. One of the most powerful and immediate applications of the 80-20 principle appears in daily habits. Most people try to overhaul their lives with complexity, new planners, elaborate routines, schedules packed with improvement tasks. But real change rarely requires more effort. It requires noticing the few habits that influence everything else. For example, waking up early doesn't just add time. It changes the tone of the day. Reading daily doesn't just accumulate knowledge. It reshapes how the mind interprets reality. Exercising consistently doesn't just strengthen the body. It strengthens discipline, energy, and self-respect. The power comes not from the habit itself, but from the chain reaction that habit triggers. Those chain reactions are the essence of the 20%. A small action that changes everything. Even in relationships, the 80-20 principle shapes meaning. A small number of conversations create intimacy. A few shared experiences build trust. A handful of people have the power to change the way you see yourself entirely. Yet most individuals scatter their emotional energy across too many connections, spreading themselves thin, trying to maintain relationships that have already dissolved naturally. Real connection is never about quantity. It is about depth. When someone begins investing deeply in the few relationships that matter, something beautiful happens. Life becomes warmer, more grounded, more real. The same truth applies to conflict. Not every disagreement requires attention. Not every misunderstanding must be corrected. The ability to let go, to walk away from the trivial, becomes emotional intelligence. In the same way that not every task in life has equal impact, not every emotional reaction deserves expression. Some battles are not worth the energy required to fight them. Knowing which ones are worth it is wisdom. In larger systems, the principle reveals how societies evolve. A small number of innovations, electricity, the internet, the smartphone, reshape the entire human experience. A small number of creators, scientists, reformers, thinkers shift culture for millions. A small number of decisions made at the highest levels alter the trajectory of nations. The principle does not just explain life on a personal scale. It explains history. Yet the principle does not imply that only a few people matter. It implies that small acts, done deeply and with intention, create disproportionate influence. A teacher may teach hundreds of students, but only a handful of conversations may change the trajectory of a child's life. A leader may speak to crowds, but a single private interaction may build loyalty forever. We rarely know which moments will become the 20%, but we learn that the moments where we are fully present are the ones most likely to echo. And that leads to a profound insight. The 80-20 life is not rushed. It is slow, deliberate, and aware. It values depth over speed, clarity over activity, purpose over performance. It recognizes that meaningful work is not done under pressure, but under intention. When tasks are chosen with clarity, work feels lighter. When relationships are chosen with sincerity, connection feels richer. When habits are chosen with awareness, identity feels more real. This clarity also changes how we experience ambition. Many people spend their lives chasing goals that were never truly theirs, goals inherited from family, culture, comparison, or fear. The 80-20 principle strips away the noise and asks a simple question. What do you actually want? Not what you are supposed to want. Not what impresses others. But what resonates with your internal compass. The thing that energizes rather than exhausts. When someone identifies the few desires that genuinely matter, their pursuit becomes more joyful than pressured. They no longer run. They move with intention. They no longer accumulate achievements as trophies. They accumulate meaning as a way of living. Life stops feeling like a race to somewhere else and becomes a deeper experience of being fully alive where you are. But understanding the principle intellectually is not enough. The real transformation comes when a person begins acting on it, when they begin saying no to commitments that drain them, saying no to expectations that don't align, saying no to the noise of the world so they can hear the direction of their own voice. The courage to say no is the doorway to the 20%. This courage is not always easy. It can mean disappointing people. It can mean appearing unusual. It can mean walking a path fewer people understand. But the reward is a life that feels like your own, a life designed rather than inherited. As this clarity deepens, something unexpected happens. Effort begins to decrease while results continue to rise. The individual is no longer fighting the current. They are aligning with it. They begin choosing roles, relationships, work, and goals that naturally match their strengths. Their life becomes lighter not because there is less in it, but because what remains is meaningful. Effort becomes expression. Work becomes craft. Time becomes space. Identity becomes intentional. This is the true promise of the 80-20 principle. Not efficiency, not productivity, but freedom. The freedom to build a life around what matters. The freedom to direct energy toward what is alive and release what is empty. The freedom to live deliberately rather than reactively. The freedom to flourish instead of chase. The world will continue to be uneven. Most outcomes will come from a few inputs. But once you understand the imbalance, you are no longer subject to it. You are able to use it. You are able to choose your 20%. And in choosing your 20%, you choose your direction, your identity, and your destiny. In the end, the 80-20 principle is not simply a rule of results. It is a philosophy of meaning, a way of living with clarity, a path toward a life that feels full, centered, purposeful, and free. Because life does not reward those who do the most. It rewards those who focus on what matters most. If this message resonated with you, subscribe and join us for more wisdom that fuels growth.